Is this okay? Lighting and everything? So, okay. So I'm gonna be. Sorry. Okay.
Of course my
Fancy.
sound is off. My sound was on in Discord, and I forgot to turn my sound on in OBS. But my dog is barking because the robot vacuum just started up. Hello, Raiders! Welcome in. And now that I'm not muted in the Twitch, thank you for calling that out and pointing it out for me. I'm Stephanie Gildart, StephWeavesTales. I stream about weekly, twice a week, doing writing stuff. And as my background, I also am in college, I was a writing consultant. Now I work as an English teacher. And I have a master's degree in children's literature and writing for children, which involved a lot of literature and analysis and thinking about all of the important things about writing. Rachel, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Rachel Balla. I am a lifelong reader and writer, and yeah, I work as an English teacher. I don't know, Steph. What else is applicable? I my bachelor's is in literature from University of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
And you're also an excellent writing consultant. Both of us went through writing consultant training, the same program, the same writing center at college. So, giving critique is something that we specialized in, and giving critique to our peers, especially, which is really what critique is all about as writers.
Absolutely.
Yep. Cool. So, today, what we're going to be covering is we're going to be talking about who can critique and kind of what are the different types of critiquers who are in the world around us. We're going to be talking about setting expectations at the beginning of your critiquing process. We're going to talk about prioritizing what feedback you're giving, what's going to have the most impact and help the author the most. And we're going to be talking about how you deliver critique to the author as well. And now I'm going to step away from my camera for 3 seconds and close this door, so hopefully the dog will be stuck in here with me and not worry about the robot vacuum. If at any time you have questions, you can absolutely use my channel points to ask a question. I'm keeping track of those things. And if you have questions but you don't have a Twitch account, but you are on the Discord server for Writers CONduit, I'm also keeping an eye on the channel chat. We are in panel 1 chat. So any questions you've got anywhere along the way, just go ahead, drop them in. Let's go. So the answer to the question, can you critique, is yes, you can. All kinds of people give feedback. And these are 3 broad categories of feedback that you can 3 broad categories of people who give feedback. You've got critique partners who are usually fellow writers who exchange feedback for feedback often. Sometimes people just like giving critique without asking for critique in return, and those friends are amazing. Rachel is one of those friends for me as a writer, and she often will look at my early drafts and give me really good insights about, like, this was what made sense, this is what characters were confusing, or this is what I think it should sound like. So having a trusted critique partner is really helpful. Beta readers are a little bit different from critique partners because they're usually readers more than writers. Beta readers can also be fellow writers, but some people are beta readers because they love reading and they love helping to give feedback to writers. They are often the kind of readers who are interested in the story that the writer is writing, and writers will seek them out because it's like you're hitting a later draft in your edits and you're wanting to make sure that your story makes sense. And then sensitivity readers also offer feedback. Sensitivity readers are often paid, and if you do get a sensitivity reader, even if they don't ask for pay, giving them something in return to acknowledge the work that they are doing is very important because it can be tough for someone who is a sensitivity reader to read through things and kind of talk about how um, talk about harmful tropes, and the ways that members of their marginalized community may be misrepresented in media. And what sensitivity readers do is they really provide a critical eye to support a writer's awareness and learning and growth when a writer is writing outside of their area of experience. Um, so, one thing I want to emphasize is you do not need special training, a college degree, or even more writing experience to provide supportive feedback to writers. Um, this is something that I experienced firsthand when I was a college writing consultant. In our college writing center, some of the best people who gave feedback were people who were English language learners who had had to work through the writing process, um, and understood the writing process more deeply because of it. The key here is empathetic analysis, and this is something I actually want Rachel to talk about because it's something that she focuses on a lot with her students. You
This is
are,
my term, and I didn't really know
go
what.
ahead. You're kind of cutting in and out, but keep talking.
Yeah, okay. So this is my term. I didn't really know what to call it, but I picked this up in college and it was really a method of analysis where you are tracking your responses, like your emotional responses as a reader, and then analyzing that by tracing it back to what did the writer do in order to create that response in me. So I think that's a really powerful way to give feedback because if you're a really engaged and empathetic reader, that's really all you need in order to give really good quality feedback. You don't have to have a degree or be an expert. You just have to be a really empathetic analyst.
Awesome. Good to see in the chat that it's not coming through cut for you. I don't know why it was cutting out a little bit for me, but if the audio is good, the audio is good. Yeah, definitely like seconding that. Just being able to understand why you feel a certain way when you read is the key to giving good feedback. It's not understanding grammar better. It's not understanding story structure better. It's um, understanding what's going on in the text and why you're feeling of reaction to it. So the next bit of presentation is all about setting expectations when you're doing critique. In the writing center in college, we would, always sit down for the first 5 minutes with our consultees, and we would ask them, "Why are you here? What do you want to get out of this session?" And that's really what setting expectations is all about. Figuring out what does the writer need and what sort of time constraints do you have. Like in college, it was when is the due date, but for writers it might be when is the due date, when is this getting published, but it can be other things too. um, so one thing is, you want to make sure that you are separating your experiences from the intended audience experience. That's a unique thing for giving feedback to a writer. This is something that I especially notice if the audience of the book is intended for children's lit. So for adult fiction, maybe a little bit different. um, what was that? Okay.
Me?
Yeah, I thought I heard you say something.
No, it's just you're cutting out for me a lot too. So I think maybe the connection. I don't know what's going on, but
Okay. I'm sorry that I'm cutting out. Hopefully it's coming through smooth for you guys. It looks like it's coming through smooth through OBS. It might be Discord isn't picking up my mic as well for you. Um, hmm.
makes sense.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, I'm good. Good. So it helps to know who the intended audience is for this thing that you are working on, giving feedback to. Because if the intended audience is teenagers, then you can keep in mind not just your own personal reaction and your own personal preferences, but also what you know about teen readers. Or if the intended audience is romance, you can provide, romance readers. You can think about what do romance readers expect in a romance story, um, and kind of broaden your perspective, not just your preferences, but feedback of like who, what else might people think while they're reading. It also really helps to know the time constraints, because if the writer is coming to you and they have a specific deadline, they're trying to self-publish this and they've set up a timeline for themselves and they've been hyping an event that's going to happen in 2 months, or 2 weeks or 2 days, you've got completely different priorities you've got to set. um, and then you also have to know how much time do you really have to read and provide feedback per day, because I know as a writer, I get really frustrated when someone volunteers to beta read or offer critique, and then they never get back to me because they got too busy. Um, so being able to communicate on your side as the critiquer, hey, I'm going to be busy for the next couple of weeks, but I'm going to dig into this. Um, I'm going to dig into this in about 2 weeks, and I'll try to get feedback to you in about a month. So you know how much time you have, so you know how much time the writer has. That can help you narrow your focus down and really prioritize what kind of feedback you're giving to. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure you're asking for the writer's expectations. Um, Asking for the writer's expectations is something that really helps you set the tone for the kind of feedback you're going to give. And if the writer is the kind of writer who is just like, I just want your general feedback, it can still help you to ask some certain questions to gather an idea of what it is they're looking for. Knowing what stage of writing they're on, who's the intended audience, um, what's their implicit promise or their through line or theme, or kind of like what kind of story are they trying to tell here? What
Mhm.
are they most nervous about? Um, what are details that they've put special effort into that they want to make sure are clear? And what's their favorite thing about the manuscript? All of those things can really help you out as you're giving feedback.
Yeah, I really love to ask that last question to my students all the time because it really helps me focus on what's important to them about this, what was meaningful in the writing process for them, or what stands out. And also asking, I often require my students to bring specific questions for me, because the only question that they ever ask is, "What grade is this going to get?" And I love being able to redirect them towards, "No, but what are you trying to do? What are you loving? What are you nervous about?" It can
Hmm.
really help you be an informed reader, narrow your lens.
Hmm. And it also, I think, helps set the tone, of being something positive where you recognize that the writer has put a lot of work into this and you're respecting the work that they've done. Because um, writers, we often, not all of us, but we often tend to be a little bit nervous, especially about sharing our work, especially if it's an early draft. So it helps so much to encourage the writer by asking some questions and getting a sense of where they're at, um, and getting their ideas about what is it they're really looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. So, after you've figured out all of those expectations, you know your time constraints, you know what kind of feedback the author or the writer is looking for, next you're going to be prioritizing your critique. And you prioritize based on some different things. The amount of time that you've got, but also in the writing center for college we had what was called the spiral. And the spiral was specific for giving critique on essays that were assignments for college teachers. But the principles of the spiral were essentially you want to focus from the top down. What are the things that are going to affect the whole entire story and or whole entire essay in the case of college? And then you kind of narrow down your focus. If it's on track in the big picture, then okay, how about this next thing? And how about this next thing? How about this next thing?
Exactly. And that's why understanding the time constraints is so important, because if a writer comes to you and is like, this is going to my publisher tomorrow, you can make sure it goes out with no typos, but it doesn't do you a lot of good to say, hey, I don't think your theme is coming through clearly when it's due in the morning.
Hmm. So, hopefully, though, you have time to give really thoughtful critique and feedback. Maybe you can also think about this in terms of like maybe you're just looking at one or two scenes in the story, and then if you're only looking at one or two scenes in the story, like usually with my critique group, we'll read through about 2 chapters of somebody's work each time that we meet, and we're really more focused on the bottom half of the stuff because we're only looking at a piece of the whole picture. And then when we get to the end of the book, if they finish the whole novel that they're working on, then we talk about like, okay, this is how the whole story came together for us. Um, but kind of working through the top down view and why this is in the order that it is. The very top is broad expectations. That's things like genre expectations, reader expectations, especially regarding harmful stereotypes. So, this is also things like genre expectations can be the overall word count. If someone is writing a picture book and they give you a picture book manuscript that has 10,000 words, that's way too long for a picture book because picture books usually have between 500 and 1,000 words, and you've given me 10,000 words. So you've got some problems here about the idea of putting together this picture book. Um, or with a romance novel, one of the things that readers really expect in romance novels is a happily ever after or happily for now kind of an ending to the story. So you want to keep in mind what's going to be coming in genre wise at the end of the story for that. Hmm.
Should we move to the second one?
Sure.
Yeah, so the second one is theme, through line, or implicit promise. What is your intent? What inspired you to write this, and how are you going to see that message is effectively carried through? On a broad level, down to what figurative language you choose. But are you making are you making your point?
Hmm. And I know, like, for me, as much as I love writing, in English class, like that literary analysis side of English, theme became kind of a dirty word for me for a long time. But as I came to understand theme from my creative writing perspective as less about having a message that people are going to write essays about in college and more about like what is the human experience that I'm trying to share in this story, or what is the kind of story that I'm trying to tell? Like maybe the human experience that I am sharing in this story is it is a fantasy adventure, and really I'm just promising that my characters are going to go through the hero's journey and they're going to grow and experience challenges and defeat the bad guy at the end. And it's not like it has to be this whole literary criticism, deep, meaningful thing, but understanding that that's my goal as an author, to tell an adventurous romp where the villain dies and the heroes win in the end. You're going to give different kinds of feedback if you know that's the writer's goal versus if their goal is to push against and question and show how when heroes are expected to defeat the villain, then they become overwhelmed and stressed out and they go through trauma and now they're going to have PTSD. That's going to give you a completely different feeling through line implicit promise. And so the feedback you're going to be giving for that is going to be different depending. Um, the next category is characters and setting. So this is kind of in the middle because the setting and the world building and the character development can have an impact across the manuscript, but often has more impact at a scene level as you're trying to understand in this scene why is the character acting in this way.
The next one is organization. Once you know what the story is, what your point is, your theme, you know your setting, you know your characters. Then you really have to think about how are you going to organize this. You might intend for there to be this buildup of tension at the beginning, but a reader might just think it's slow and boring. So thinking about things like the timing of scenes, sequencing. There are those fun, chapter headings that might be mysterious, or flashbacks, or when does the plot twist happen, and how are all of those things unfolding. Um, that's the next one.
Yep, yep, yep. And then at the very bottom is your word choice and descriptions, the sentence and paragraph level details. This is at the very bottom because let's say your story organization means that you have too many scenes where the characters are in this exact same fight over and over and over again, and you're going to cut two of those scenes out and splice them all together so it's one thing. If you're trying to give feedback on word choice and descriptions in scenes that are going to get cut anyway, as a critiquer, you are wasting time and you're wasting the writer's time on it too. So,
And we
make
all know
yeah, go ahead.
if you have to, if it feels like cutting off your own fingers to have a beautifully crafted scene or a sentence that you have to cut.
That too, for sure. And we all know that feeling, especially like when I've done short stories and flash fiction. I tend to write long. I tend to write in the 6,000 to 10,000 word range for my air quote short stories. And the requirements tend to be like in the 2,000 to 3,000 word range. And now I'm having to figure out how do I emphasize my character development? What am I going to organize in my story? And what word choice and descriptions can I cut to make this happen faster? Um, so critique from the top down. If you see things in that are going to affect more of the story, that's where you really want to spend your time when you're giving feedback to the writer. All right. It looks like we're right on track for our schedule too. I love that. Might even be a little bit ahead. Um, so as you're reading, you want to think about everything the writer is wanting to give you feedback on. You want to think about what's going to affect the story from the top down, and then you want to think about how are you going to deliver this critique. And it might actually be something you've set in advance with the writer. There are a lot of different delivery formats, but the three main ones are conversation, where you're having an actual conversation, maybe one on one with the person, or in a writing group critique session where a lot of people are giving feedback on people's writing. You want to take the second one?
Um, oh no, this one's more your wheelhouse.
Okay.
That's very professional.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So edit letters are where you really write out your thoughts separate from the story. And this is useful for very big picture feedback when you're talking about how the story works, when you're talking about the story organization, the impact of the character development over the course of the story, things like that. You're wanting to touch on things that happen in a lot of different scenes, and you're not going to be talking face to face, or maybe you are, and you want to be able to give that to people. And then at the
Or
bottom, yeah, not
yeah.
at the bottom, but the third type is inline notes, which is really useful.
Oh, I will take.
Okay, go for it.
This is one that I really like to do, especially as a teacher, because it allows you to sort of have a conversation with the text as you're reading it. You can put in thoughts. This reminds me of this, or is that foreshadowing? Like you can ask questions. You can give your reactions like sentence by sentence, and they can just kind of follow along with you. It's also really easy, especially with like Google Docs, to put yourself in like suggesting mode, and then you can make little edits as you go if they're if that's appropriate to your priorities.
Hmm. Um, Going a little bit more in depth into each of these. Oh, somehow edit letter ended up first. That's fine. I thought that conversation. Nope, there it is. Whew, I clicked 2 slides and I almost skipped this one. So if you are doing a conversation, whether it's a group critique or one-on-one, there are some norms for both sides that I think really help with giving strong critique and giving strong feedback. And one of the things is for the writer side, you have to remember you can initiate the conversation and say, okay, so this was my story. This is the stuff that I really wanted feedback on. What did you think? That helps set the tone for staying focused on what you really want to benefit from in the conversation. But once you've done that, you want to listen with an open mind and wait to be asked questions, because if you're feeling defensive as a writer, you're going to be shutting down to the feedback that you're receiving. And um, sometimes,
And that's very
go ahead.
sorry.
No, you're good. Talk.
uh, that's it's very easy for writers to do that, to feel a little bit defensive, and to start trying to explain what you were intending rather than letting the work speak for itself, because your intent, if it's not coming through on the page, it doesn't matter what you say. We need to go from what's in front of us. Then we can marry the intent to determine the effectiveness and how to move forward.
Hmm. And it might be something where your intent isn't coming through, and the critiquer actually asks you, okay, so I was really confused in this part of the story. Can you explain to me what you meant to do there? And then that's the time for you to kind of bring up, okay, this was what I was trying to do, um, and what was going on. Now, another thing that can happen in critique groups or conversations is if a critiquer is being overbearing or overly demanding, that might be a time for you as the writer to go, I need a mental health break from this. I need to take a step back. This isn't working for me. And that's totally okay, right? As a writer, you have the right to protect yourself, protect your emotions, protect your work. Um, but being aware of there's a difference between being overprotective and being overprotective defensive versus being aware of the situation, what's going on, and that this is not working for you. So put yourself in that
I
open
also
position. Yeah, go ahead.
But I'll also throw in there that um, sometimes it's really important that you be comfortable with discomfort, because if your critiquer is letting you know that maybe there are some harmful stereotypes that you weren't aware of, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to have a difficult conversation, and those are going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's a
Hmm.
good thing.
Yeah, definitely that, right? And I think that when the critiquer follows certain guidelines, which we're about to go into, that can really help with focusing it on a positive for the writer and keeping it from the critiquer being on attack. And there are critiquers who do like to attack. And so like you have to be aware of that, right? And you have to be a little bit safe. And you don't want to be a critiquer who attacks. That's not strong critique. That's just being mean. Straight up being mean.
Yes.
You don't want to be mean. Um, so focus first on the writer's priorities as the critiquer. If you notice something higher up the top down list, explain why you're bringing it up. Like Rachel mentioned, harmful stereotypes, right? That's going to be something that's in the broad expectations that you really want to bring up. Even if it's an uncomfortable conversation, if you can say, hey, I think that I noticed this harmful stereotype. Are you okay with me talking about it and explaining why this could be bad for your audience, or this made me uncomfortable? Hopefully the writer will be open to hearing, and as you're asking, like, hey, I noticed this, can I talk to you about this? Then that opens the writer up and they know, okay, I need to listen to this. Or the writer can say, no, I'm not interested in going there right now, and you can kind of just check that off your list. You tried, you did your best, and move on down your list of things you want to talk about. You want to also remember to bring up what worked for you and be encouraging and supportive, because if things worked for you, writers love to hear that. Writers love to know, okay, I don't need to make changes to that bit. That bit is doing what I wanted it to do, and it's doing it that way because of this or that or the other thing in the text. And uh, yeah, Kitty Wren. Um, Volunteered unsolicited critiques. Those people can tend to be out of line. Exactly. That's one of the things about giving strong critique is it is strongest when it is solicited, not unsolicited. And if the writer's not asking for feedback, there's a reason they're not asking for feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and focus on what you read, how it makes you feel, and why it made you feel that way. That's that empathetic reader, empathetic analysis part of it. I was confused when this happened, or I felt like this character was really fascinating because of these reasons. Um, you can ask questions to clarify confusion, but avoid prescribing solutions. You can offer thoughts, but not say, in your story, you should do this and this and this and this. And that's where you're getting into those unsolicited critiques. Writers don't need you to tell them how to fix the problem. Writers just need to know what the problems are so that they can fix them. And if the writer does want insights, the writer will ask and say, well, what can I do about that? And that's when you are solicited to give that in that conversation. So, conversation style, remember you're face to face, you're dealing in real time with each other. Um, and those are some of the norms to keep in mind. In an edit letter, it gives you a really concentrated space to provide big picture feedback. Before you write and while you're reading through the manuscript, you might want to organize or outline your thoughts. Use the top down approach to help you organize your thoughts. Give yourself like 5 spaces. Tell me, record stuff about broad expectations, genre expectations, things like that. Separate out like where are you seeing the implicit promise or the through line coming through and the story feels like it's carrying, or where are you feeling like the story is wandering and it's no longer on track. Um, Characters and setting, what details do you notice about different characters, story organization, word choice and descriptions, all that stuff. Um, so organize it in a way where the things you're going to write in the edit letter are grouped together thematically. Just like you organize an essay, you want your paragraphs to be structured, you want to have one topic at a time, not jumping around from place to place to place. In order for it to be a really strong edit letter, it's got to make sense to the writer, and jumping around doesn't do that. Always remember to include things that you enjoyed and why you enjoyed them. So, like, if the theme and the through line and the implicit promise are solid in the story, like, you can say, hey, one of the things that I really loved was that the story carried through on its promise to give me a real romance with struggle, but then they're happy in the end. And that, that felt, the struggles that they went through felt real, and the promise at the end and the happy for now was like perfect. And that, you can describe why it was perfect to you and how it worked and all of that. So include those things that you enjoyed so the writer knows I was doing those things good. I can do even better when I'm editing and emphasize those things more. And then define the issues that you see and why these things didn't work for you. And as always, avoid prescribing solutions. In an edit letter, since you don't get to have a conversation and the author doesn't have the chance to say, hey, do you have ideas about this? One thing you can do is try to, um, if you're feeling like you want to say, you should cut out this character, instead of saying you should cut out this character, you can say, what would happen if instead of having these two characters, it was only this one, you combined them together in one character? Or what was your goal when you included this thing? Or questions like that can kind of get the author thinking. And if they want to reply to your edit letter and ask for suggestions, then it opens it up.
Moving line edit.
Yes.
So, like I was saying earlier, I love this because it allows you to give a play by play of your reactions as you read. what's exciting, what's building tension, what is what's boring. I often see, I do it too all the time. I'll write the same sentence three different ways, just in case my point didn't come across the first time. And it really helps to be able to be like, look at these three sentences. These are all the same. Um, and then it's also very easy to add in just little edits, your commas and capitalization and those little things. Very easy to do in line. So if you're in Microsoft Word, you enable track changes. If you're in Google Docs, you can switch to suggesting instead of editing, although they can look at your edits. Um, but suggesting just makes it easier. Um, and then I love this idea of taking a highlighter color um, for yourself and for the writer, so that you're getting, you're very clearly, you can say red is the broad expectations, the orange is the implicit promise. So they can go through, and if you're commenting on this simile here, and it's coded as figurative language, they're not going to mistake that for, oh wow, that was the wrong implicit promise. So that can help with clarity as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, as always, remember to emphasize the stuff that works as well as the trouble spots.
Yep. And depending on your role as a reader, that might change, right? If your role as a reader is you're acting as a sensitivity reader, then you're going to be giving a play-by-play of your reactions of what worked for you as a member of your marginalized community, whether that's an LGBTQ community, whether it's the Black community, Asian American, whatever experience that you are part of that you're giving your sensitivity response to. Disabilities, mental illness, all that sensitivity reading. Get sensitivity readers. They're amazing, guys. It's really wonderful to be able to have someone who's part of that community to really read through and say, hey, you may not be aware of this, but this is feeding directly into this harmful stereotype about how disabled people need to be rescued from their disability. Um, or, whatever, and being open to hearing that and everything, versus if you are a beta reader, if you're just beta reading, you're probably going to be most focused on giving that play by play reaction and being like, man, I feel really excited about this part of the story, or ooh, I got really lost here. um yeah.
Yep.
Cool. So
Okay.
that's everything that we had to share about giving strong critique, and now we're open for questions. That's us. We are going to be offering editing services in the near future. We haven't got everything together quite yet. Um, I specialize in children's lit, science fiction, fantasy world building, copy edits, creation of individual style guides, and Arrow Ace sensitivity reads.
You are amazing at that world building stuff. Like, worlds you dream up are incredible. And I read mostly adult fiction. I'm all about those themes and through lines and looking for all the layers of meaning. Also strong with line editing, and I consider myself well read, especially in anti-Black racism, and I love to read with an anti-racist lens.
hmm One of the things that has fed into that experience for Rachel, I don't know how much she wants to talk about this, but her husband is Black. He's from Cameroon. And so he comes from Africa with different experiences as a Cameroonian American than African Americans who grew up in America. And those experiences that she's had interacting with her husband, his family, his friends, have pushed her to develop her understanding of anti-racism through a lot of reading and a lot of study.
Yep.
Yep. All right, so we have about 20 minutes left, and we're open to questions for giving strong critique. We can also just talk about whatever storytelling stuff. I can tell you about writing center stories, I guess. I don't know. English teacher drama. I'm gonna switch over to the other screen. Boop. And I'm also going to quietly put on some background music. So also, if you want to use this time to just like do a little bit of writing yourself, we're here to answer questions. Um, Panel lasts for about 20 more minutes. I'm just going to turn on music really low because waiting for questions can be awkward if there's not some kind of sound.
Have a voice.
Hmm. I know for me, from the writer side of things, some of the best feedback I've gotten has been, oh yeah, definitely. I can share the link to the Google Slides right now. That was on my mind. I made sure to set it up with sharing so that you can access it if you would like to be able to read through the slides yourself. Why is it not exiting presentation mode? There we go. I will grab that share link for you now. But some of the best feedback I've gotten has been things that I already know that I am uncomfortable with, that I need to get better at, and I've had to kind of open myself to hearing that and being willing to change. The immediate thing that comes to mind for me is I'm not published yet. I've gotten some full requests, and the feedback that I get on the full requests that I've sent out has been very similar. They love my world building, they love my voice, but that the characters through line, the character's journey, the character just feels like they're static throughout the story. They are experiencing the story, but they're not experiencing emotions in the story. And so, like, the first time I got that feedback, I was like, well, that's just because you don't understand the character well enough. That's your problem, you know. But then, as that was something that I was consistently hearing over and over again, it made me go, okay, wait a second. Maybe I need to think more about this. Maybe I need to read more about how to create deeper characters. And as a result, I've got 3 books over here sitting on my desk that I've used to kind of help myself out. There's Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which it's more than just beat sheets in this. The part of the book that I actually love the most, and my dog's going to start barking, is the creating a story-worthy hero at the beginning that talks a lot about, like, thinking about who's your character, what do they need in their life, what do they want in their life, what kind of lesson do they need to learn. Creating Character Arcs by K.M. Wieland. And I've talked about these in other panels too. I'm just repeating myself kind of if you haven't heard this before. It does a really good job of breaking down at this point in the story, the character can be going through this kind of emotional journey. And then Wired for Story by Lisa Cron talks a lot about the neuroscience behind the way that people react to stories. And this one really was, I think, what helped me break through and understand more that when you're thinking about the theme of a story, it's the emotional journey that the character is on, and it's how it's the human experience. Yeah. So if
I need
you're
to read.
Yeah, you do. It's really good. So, like, if you're hearing consistent feedback over and over again, and you're getting defensive because you're like, no, I'm doing that right, that might be a time when you need to stop and think. That's the moral of that story. Oh no, Rachel, did you freeze? Or are you just sitting very, very still? I think you're frozen. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's totally normal experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ATW, you're right, said in the chat, this is why I like written feedback, because I will argue with it and then realize they are right and fix it 2 days later. Okay, good. I think you are a little bit unfrozen now. You were frozen there for a second. At least you were frozen with like a really nice smile on your face, so you looked good. You weren't like, I went through an extra or something like that, right? And the other thing I like about written feedback is when I read written feedback, the first thing I always do is see the problems and get defensive and get sad because that means the entire story is bad. But then when I go back and I read through the written feedback again, it's like, oh, for the
Mhm.
first 3 paragraphs, they were telling me everything that really worked and they'd enjoyed, and I just ignored that. And yeah, also
Yeah.
with like whether it's edit letters or it's inline, you can't absorb it all in one sitting.
Oh, but the pandemic was awful, but one thing that I really benefited from what with my students this year was when I would set aside time to give them feedback, we would get on Zoom and they could record. So we could have the conversation in real time, but they didn't have to feel like they were taking notes because they could go back and rewatch it, which I thought was a great method.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Oh, but
yeah.
Steph, do you remember that do you remember that time I got the racist feedback?
Oh yeah, that was ugh, that was dumb. And I mean, sometimes you're
Yeah,
gonna
so I had written this story.
go for it. Tell the
Yeah,
story.
I had written this story, and it was the story was about this black man and this white woman who are like shoved together in like a rainstorm, and she's very uncomfortable. And anyway, that my through line was all about like our implicit bias and how we don't, we're just uncomfortable around race and racial discussions. And so I was trying to communicate that through the story, and so I deliberately had my female white character being uncomfortable in this situation with this black man, alone with this black man. And the feedback I got was like very weirdly defensive of this white female character that I had written. Like, no, she's not racist. She just, maybe this, what, like giving excuses. And I was like, but I wrote it. It was intentional. So that written feedback wasn't the best, but
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. ATW Wright says, I'm kind of a feedback wimp, not about spelling and grammar, but about the bigger things. And yes, I think that the tough
Mhm.
thing as from the writer side is learning that feedback does not. How do I explain it? The goal of feedback is help you take your story, which is already good, and make it better. And I think that when you get feedback that's telling you you need to change this, this, and this, it makes you think my story is bad. And it's like, no, 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 no. Wait a second. Remember, your story is good. There is a critiquer, a beta reader, a partner, another writer who is taking the time out of their life, because your story is good, to give you advice and give you thoughts about how to take it from being good to being the best it can be. And that like really helps, right? At least for me, it really helps to remember they're taking their time to tell me these things because they want my story to be better. And
Mhm.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it's totally okay to cry. Absolutely okay to cry. Take the time to cry when
Yeah.
you get bad feedback. um
Yeah. And I think that the thing with feedback, right? And maybe feedback is a better word than critique, because I do think critique carries the connotation of like, well, I know how to do it better than you. But feedback is just it's just like that's just it. Like it's not an evaluation, it's not necessarily an evaluation, it's not a grade, it's just a reaction.
mhm
And
mhm
that's going to be good, that's going to be bad, that's going to be the whole gamut, because if your readers are not on a journey, then you're not doing your job at all. So it's going to be ups and downs and frustrations, and they're going to blow up at you when you kill their favorite character, but it can be worth it.
yeah. Kitty Wren said, I'd be really iffy about sensitivity feedback, and that's because so many people are on a different page. And I think that that hits on something that's really cool to me about sensitivity feedback. Like, instead of feeling iffy about it, I really like it because marginalizations, it's not one single experience. Every single person who is in a marginalized group, whether it's that they deal with racism, homophobia, sexism, whatever, um, disability is another one that I think that people forget a lot about, that really takes a lot of attention. When you're getting sensitivity readers feedback, you're getting one person's perspective. There was a story that I heard in grad school, a picture book writer who was Jewish writing a story based on a Jewish myth, making a picture book out of it, went to three different other Jewish people to get feedback on it and got three completely different takes. One person loved it, one person thought that it was way too stereotypical Jewish, one person felt a different way and was kind of in between the two. And being able to hear all of those perspectives lets you make intentional choices about what you're including in your story. So someone might see your character who is black and a member of a gang and go, great, another gang member black person. And someone else might look at it and say, okay, so this person in your story is black and in a gang, but you've also got these three other characters who are black in your story who are doing different things. So yes, this one is feeding into the trope, but this is showing the ways that then break it down and do other things. And some people are going to get just like completely fixated on that one thing that they hate. That they hate seeing it, they never want to see it again. Other people are going to see what you're trying to do in big picture stuff. And
Exactly.
yep.
And
Um,
the last thing you want is for your book to go out there in the world and that perspective that it's a stereotype was never brought up to you.
mm-hmm. And that can happen a lot
At
too.
least if Yeah, at least if somebody tells you, you can be like, oh, let me make sure I subvert that in some other way. Let me make sure I have representation over here. It doesn't mean you have to change that, but it does mean you should be aware of that view.
Yeah. ATW Wright says it's comforting to me to know that one time Hans Christian Andersen got a bad review and he laid on for hours on the front yard crying. And like, yeah, I love those stories about writers who you love who get bad reviews or who feel bad about their writing and what they did about it. That's really helpful. And HTW Wrights also said, I've also gotten better at actually focusing on the good things. I used to just make a list of the things to fix, but this last time I made a list to myself of good things they wrote, and I read through that each time I dove in to try to fix something. One of my creative writing classes in college, my writing instructor actually told us you want to make sure that you know what's working so that you don't take away from that stuff that's working. You want to fix the story in ways that's going to build on what's already working. So remembering your story is a good story, you're just trying to make it better. And these are the things that are making it good. These are the things that are working so that you don't accidentally slash those things out of the story is so useful.
Yeah, especially if you tend to be pretty self-critical.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to be like, well, that's no, and just get rid of something that was somebody's favorite part.
Yeah. Um, Raven White says, I've been doing crits with my group for 10 years, and in the beginning, it was hard. I think that is one of those keys about forming a critique group that actually meets face to face and talks to each other about their stories. You're going to find that you have to build relationships and build norms before you actually get comfortable with each other, and that can take a few sessions. You might also find that there are some people in the group whose values don't align with the whole group, and maybe you need to ask them to find another group to go critique with. Um, and building a good critique group takes time, patience, and understanding to build trust. Like, I've known Rachel for how many years now? I don't know. 20 plus years. Let's not go into the specifics. 20 plus years. So Rachel can just um go straight into being super harsh with me, and I will understand completely because we have 20 years of experience with each other where we know this is where we're coming from. But somebody who I've just met, I make a very intentional choice if I'm doing a critique exchange with them to be very positive forward because I want to make sure that I build a relationship with positive experiences before I start trying to get harsh with them. Um, yeah. Kitty Rin says, I'm trans. I cannot keep up with what's going on in the LGBTQ community. If I were to write my own story, I'm pretty sure there would be people who would insist I was being insensitive towards LGBTQ people. And I feel that way. I'm Arrow Ace, and so I can feel that way a bit sometimes too, because there are people who are not experiencing your marginalization who will tell you that this is how your story needs to be told. And your truth is not their truth is not your truth. Like ATW right says, no group is a monolith, and writing your truth will never be anyone else's truth. Um, I think that the key is one of the keys that I've loved seeing shared, like all the on Writing with Color on Tumblr, um, they share about include multiple people from that marginalization. If your goal is to represent this particular marginalization well, show multiple people with different experiences within that marginalization, even if it's side characters who are just in one or two scenes. Being able to show that multiple perspectives, multiple angles helps to break down the stereotype. Whereas if you only have one character that is that particular way, everything that they do is going to be considered the archetypal this kind of character. So don't give your main character the burden of being everything that defies all the stereotypes. Instead, show that the experience of being in the LGBT community is not a monolith. There's many different perspectives by having other characters in the background and in their lives. Or same for Black Americans, Asian Americans, disabilities, disabled Americans, people with mental illness, showing your neurodivergence by having different people of different kinds of takes on their differences. Oh, yeah, that too. Um, Being clear on like, hey, this person is supposed to be a member of this group, instead of being like, well, after the fact, my story wasn't really diverse and everybody reads all of my characters as white characters, so I'm going to say this character was actually black the whole time. Hermione being black.
Oh.
Yeah. Yep. And that's part of that. And we're kind of getting off of critique and going into anti-racist writing here, but that's definitely part of it. But then again, it's also part of critique, because at least for me as a white woman, some of the critique that I know I'm going to get is critique about people's experiences that I have not experienced. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Some black people did read her as black, and that's totally different. Um, the author and white authors will do this. There was actually like children's lit major. There's a portion of time in children's writing where color blindness was the go-to. You do not physically describe your character's hair color, skin color, or anything, because you want the reader to be able to decide to self-insert themselves into the character, and the character to be whatever they want the character to be. If their race doesn't matter, you don't need to define it in the text. But the problem with that is when you don't define the race of the character in the text, majority readers assume everybody in the story is white. All right, it's just about time for us to go a rating to the next channel. So if you've got any last questions for us or any last comments you want to throw out about giving critique, feel free to throw them around. Yeah. I think that people are trying not to offend people, right? By keeping it vague. But the problem is when you keep it vague, what happens is you exclude people unintentionally, but it still becomes an exclusion. All right. So we will be rating into the panel on traditional versus indie publishing. Here we go. Really quick. If you want to check us out, you can check out our joint blog at can'tfaketime.com, because we've been friends for 20 plus years and you can't fake that time. So come on over there if you want to. And now let's go on our raid and continue the CONduit. And thank you for being an awesome audience and being willing to be vulnerable with us too. It's hard to talk about critique experiences, so you've been wonderful.
Thanks, guys.